Well, good morning, everybody. Yesterday, I made a quick announcement that we're going to kind of pull back on the Monday night and Thursday night videos. And so instead, because I'm no longer giving you that long-range content on those evenings, on Monday morning and Thursday morning, we're going to pump those videos more full of this long-range content. So I'd like to build a bit of a narrative here around what we've seen lately and where I think August is going to go. Okay, so let's just talk about this real quick. The first map you're looking at here goes from June 24th to July 19th. It's the latest data I've got, and why I started on June 24th was because that was the beginning of the breaking down of the big Midwestern drought. This is when the ridge in Texas began to form. This is when we saw, the deeper low that went and sat right here over Michigan. It was the one that produced like the donut hole over Michigan, but it broke out the severe weather, almost 1,000 reports of severe weather on June 25th. It was then followed up by the derecho that came through this area, and then we saw multiple rounds of thunderstorms. So what do we end up having because of this? We went drier down here in parts of the southeast, including down into Florida. We got extremely hot. I'll show you that in Texas in a few moments. We've not seen an early start to the monsoon. We've had a drier corridor here that's extended into the Canadian Prairie we've talked about quite a bit, and we were drier during this time period in parts of the Pacific Northwest. Now that is the kind of the post breakdown of the big ridges that caused all the wildfires in Canada, all right? Now before that, this is what things look like. Now remember, before this, what we had was an easterly wind coming around a ridge out of Canada, making it very dry throughout this region. Our storm sat to the south of it where the flow was still good, or it pushed up against the Rocky Mountains, which is what gave us the lift in the atmosphere. We were bone dry in parts of the Pacific Northwest, but we avoided a lot of heat south, and we avoided a lot of heat in the Southwest. So it was quite cool across the whole southern part of the United States. And again, this is the previous time, the May 10th through June 25th time frame. In fact, we can just go look at what caused all of this. So take a look. During mid-May to late June, the issue was we had a deeper trough of low pressure that just sat here, keeping things cooler. This is what drove the easterly wind in this direction, plus the ridges to the north in Canada. But the talk of the town, the thing we kept talking about was that the Bermuda High had kind of retreated and it made its way here into parts of the North Atlantic, at times over parts of Europe. So that's where we were, and then we got here. This is where we are now. So instead of having that large ridge just living over Europe, we've seen a couple of ridges return. A bigger one here in eastern Canada, take a look at that one. And then we've also seen at times ridges develop over parts of Texas, especially as of late as we got into the month of June. So this changed the flow around, and this is what introduced storms. It increased the wind speed aloft, and it gave us this. If I were to trace out the upper level pattern, there was a ridging event here, a ridge that opened from Texas all the way up the west coast of the United States, and there's that Hudson Trough. So what we're looking at now is June 25th when the pattern broke down to July 17th, which is the latest data we've got. This is what the jet stream ended up doing. So it wasn't a return of the Bermuda High, it was the building of a Texas ridge that flexed to the west at times that allowed this trough to get deeper. So any questions we're going to have about what the rest of July is going to look like, or how we think August is going to form, is going to be about the placement of these features. So we want to know, are we going to keep reinforcing this trough? Because if it does, the heat stays west. If that trough goes out and we see ridging redeveloping here, or the ridges like to open up into the central United States, then it is really going to flip the pattern around for a lot of people that have not seen a lot of heat, and it's going to start to change the precipitation pattern as well, putting some stress on central North American crops. So I want to try to answer that question and talk about what it means from coast to coast, and try to just assess where I think this is going to go in the month of August. Now, as I mentioned, the pattern we've seen since the break, since the easterly winds faded, since we got rid of the ridge that was over Quebec and put a trough in there, we've been cool. We've not seen extended time periods of excessive heat throughout much of the central United States, the Midwest, Great Basin. It got hot south. It got really hot in Texas. It's been really hot in the Southwest, and the heat's been building up the West Coast as of late. So we know that this is kind of the spring-loaded part of this pattern, where there is heat building into the system, and it's summer. So we have to watch for that to move around, because we typically don't have strong drivers in the summer. There's no big, jet stream impulse that can come through and kind of dominate the pattern in a way that would just keep it in one direction or another, all right? So we have to just look at a couple of other metrics just to keep tabs on this. This is the latest GDD anomaly map since April 1st. So you can actually see what has been more dominant in this pattern. The trough over the southeast, keeping things cool for most of this time frame, not lately, but most of it. We're still behind on GDDs, some places 100 to 200 GDDs. We've been behind here where it's been extremely wet this year. A lot of cloud cover is driving this, but because of the heat that came in early, we're above average in parts of the upper Midwest. And I just have lately, I made this track here, and then we went across up to Pierre. I'm back down at Omaha this morning. And I'll tell you something, when I got up here into parts of South Dakota, I was amazed at how tall the corn is. A lot of early season heat, I think, gave it some vegetative growth. Now, in the southwestern United States, we've had a bunch of heat lately, but it's not offsetting the cooler weather we had earlier in the season. So I just want to kind of give you all of this to tell you what things have been up to and where we think they're going to go. Okay, this is a story we need to start to cover here. Or let me rephrase it, we need to keep covering here. We have an El Nino that continues to grow. These ocean temperatures are 5 to 7 degrees C above average. We've already gotten back up to a degree above average in Niño region 3.4. But we can make an argument that even though El Nino is there, it's not doing typical El Nino things. It's not fully engaged in this pattern. Our Pacific meridional mode, the cold water here, remains. And if you just want to know, what does this mean? This generally means that if there's going to be ridging, it's probably going to open up in the midsection of the country. But if there's warm water here, and there's warm water here and here, those three areas tend to mean that the ridge is going to be back west. And we don't have a strong correlation with this ridge and the very hot ocean temperatures that are in the Atlantic right now. That's an entirely different kind of part of this flow. But it's these three things, 1, 2, 3, that are being kind of watched, I think, most carefully. Now, I've been looking back here at a couple of different graphics, and I'd like to share these with you. First of all, just look down here at the bottom. We continue to see our ocean temperatures in Niño region 3.4 climb. And here we are at the very end. We're back up to a degree C above average. But over the last 7 days, it's been warming mostly over in Niño region 1.2 or 1+2, and that Pacific warm blob just keeps getting hotter here. Now, I'm telling you these things because we're going to put this in a framework as to where I think this is going to go here in the near term. But when I mention that El Nino has not engaged, I mean, when I say El Nino is not doing typical El Nino things, this is one way by which I can tell you that. This is called the Southern Oscillation Index. It's a measurement of the pressure difference between Tahiti in the middle of the Pacific and Darwin in the northern part of Australia. Now, if we've got a full-blown El Nino, I mean, it's controlling everything, the value of the Southern Oscillation Index as seen by this red line would be way down here at like -15 to -20. I mean, it'd be very, very low. It was there for a little bit back in June, but where it's gone since then, it's come way back up here into what would technically be called kind of neutral. This is not El Nino doing El Nino things. That's one piece of evidence. The second one is the MJO. The MJO's collapsed. If there was an El Nino going on, we would see these big westerly wind bursts, and it would push the MJO out of Indonesia and start to get it moving at times into the Western Pacific, resetting into the Indian Ocean, and instead it's collapsed. It's just sitting here, kind of not in the game. And because of that, we've not had a strong signal coming out of the tropics to tell us what's going to happen. I can even look and show you where there's rising motion, and you don't see big bands of either this shade of color or this telling me that the MJO is going to be somewhere. I do take note that we see this rising motion trying to move out into the Pacific, but maybe the more significant thing to keep an eye on here is over the next 10 to 15 days, the fact that we start to now see better rising motion over Africa rather than the Pacific where the MJO is. And we always care this time of year about rising motion here. This would indicate a monsoonal behavior in the atmosphere, kicking off storms that get out here into the Atlantic. And those storms are the birthplace of our tropical systems that can make their way, toward the East Coast or into the Caribbean or Gulf. So that's actually the bigger story out of the tropics. It's not what the MJO is up to. So we look at all of that and we say, well, what's it do to the height pattern? What are we seeing here? And what I'm telling you is that I'm seeing a lot of the same old recipe for the next several days. Okay, there's the one ridge, talked about that one. Here's the Hudson Trough diving in here, and there's the ridge that's sitting over the southwest. We've seen this pattern on repeat for a while. So the flow comes in and over and dives like that. That's what keeps the west hot. That's what keeps this whole section of the country cool, what keeps storms rolling around the southern side of this. But as you know, we've talked about it all week. Going past this weekend into early next week, we see the jet picking up its speed here, rolling through Canada, and the ridge, which had been over much of the southwest, will temporarily, I think, open toward Kansas. And what this does is this pushes heat into places where we've not seen it. I'm talking about these sections of the Midwest, the upper Midwest, the northern plains, whereby 5, 6, 7 days from now, we're going to be talking about temperatures here deep into the 90s and cracking on the door of 100 degrees Fahrenheit in a place where we've not seen that. But watch, this is next Wednesday, going out to Thursday and Friday. And if we're going to keep that heat on, then this ridge needs to stay open, wide open through here. Do I think it'll stay there from next Wednesday to next Saturday? Sure. But then as we get out there beyond that, by July the 30th, look what showed back up. And if that trough is there or moves at all in this direction, this ridge can't occupy this area, and it will start to retrograde in this pattern as well. And so as we get into the month of August, that's what we begin to see. We see the ridge squishing itself farther to the south. We see the larger component of it over the Rocky Mountains. And when I see this kind of pattern here, starting August, I think about storms in this area, running over a ridge, supported by the flow on the backside of a trough. But if we were going to go just smoking hot for the rest of the year, for the whole of the country, you can't have this in place. That's the wrong setup. So heat is coming. I do expect it to last 5, 6 days in the Midwest where it's not been. I expect that when that happens, the South will be hot as well. I expect the West Coast to cool down temporarily because of it. But the big question we got to think about is, getting into August, do we see this ridge coming back and big storms rolling through here? Or do we see this ridge opening? So let's put together the things we've talked about, because there's risk of heat on the table. So your next 5 days are here. But as we let this slide out there to get to day 5 through 10, which is out to this point, that's where the west cools down. The ridge opens up here. The trough temporarily kind of goes away. And we see temperatures in this section of the country deep into the 90s and possibly above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That would be, again, next, like Tuesday, Wednesday through the end of next week. From that point beyond, though, watch. Can you see how the models are trying to reinforce, as we finish July and start August, some troughing in this area, cooler weather? That starts to back off on the heat here, taking it back down to the 90s. You notice the West Coast isn't hot. We got some heat, though, coming into the Southeast. I mean, so this is where this pattern is trying to lead us. And the Climate Prediction Center says, hey, until we get out there from the end of July into the beginning of August, we do have the risk of heat sticking around for more than a day or two, possibly maybe a week in this area. So if there's heat coming in, what I want to know is there also moisture? Because you can get hot and at the same time you can get stormy. And what we've now noticed is that the forecast models are starting to bring or increase the probabilities of storms in this area. Now, in the near term, we've got severe weather here today. We have a lingering frontal boundary here producing wetter conditions, and we have our typical Gulf Coast, East Coast daily sea breeze. We're wet in New England out of this pattern as well. As the ridge opens, see where the ridge riding storms are going to be initially. They're going to roll through parts of Canada. Southern Canada, that part of the prairie, maybe misses out. Well, what I'm questioning is, when did the storms start to kind of invigorate in this area, and is there going to be moisture in those spots? Because I think the end of July finishes hot, but what about August? So let's start to walk through some of these connections and see what we can see. First of all, what if El Nino engages? It's not there now, but what if that Southern Oscillation Index starts to drop off? We get these big westerly wind bursts across the Pacific. Well, I can tell you that historically, I'm going to go look at years like 1962. I'll look at 1965. We'll go over here to 1972. We'll talk about 1982. We'll look at 86. Just kind of walking through this. We'll also talk about 97. I'll toss in there 2002. We'll look at 2000. I should probably put 2006 in there. 2009. And we're also going to toss in here 2018. And the reason why I just drew all those lines is because each of those were years where we came out of a La Nina in the previous winter and built El Nino. Some of the other years don't quite have that same signal. And the reason I'm doing that is we were in La Nina and we're doing this right now. So when I stitch all those years together and start to ask questions, the first is, what is August temperature going to look like? If El Nino fully engaged, like it did in most of those years, and here they are listed, then we tended to not have major heat risk. I don't think this is going to be the case this year. And you ask why? I say, well, there's a bunch of heat in the ocean out here in the North Pacific, and the Atlantic is boiling. So this isn't going to be the right scenario. But the precipitation patterns can happen a bit independently of what the temperature's doing. And so we ask this question: are we really going to be stormy in the Pacific Northwest? Are we going to be stormy in this part of the Midwest, drier upper Midwest? Are we going to be dry here as well? Because those same years stitched together give you this pattern. And I'll be honest, I don't even see this occurring. And you say, well, why not? I said, well, I do anticipate storms to cascade over the ridge and hit this region. But I don't think this area is going to be dry. And the big reason for that is the tropical activity that we're starting to sense going on in that area. So that was an analog technique, and we don't have any good analogs. That's my main point. I just cannot with any confidence tell you that, oh, this analog year is the one to use, or this composite of them is the one to use, so we have to look somewhere else. Now here, what I'm going to do, let's blow this up, is I'm going to talk about these, well, let's go back to the map. I want to compare what this ocean temperature pattern, this ocean temperature pattern, and this ocean temperature pattern say about the potential for western U.S. ridging versus central U.S. ridging. And so to do that, let's go back to this again. There it is. I'm going to first show you the correlation in August with precipitation and the heat that is next to South America. If that is the case, we tend to be drier where there's blue colors. So wet throughout the west, big time storms, and near normal precip in the midsection of the country. That is Niño region 1+2. That's the heat next to South America. But let's flip this over to the Central Pacific, where we also have some heat building, okay? And if we create that plot, you now start to see that August, if you really just do a straight up correlation with El Nino, tends to be stormy in this whole region. We tend to be a bit drier, just a bit, from Texas, parts of southern Texas, through near the southeast up into the mid-Atlantic. That's not really that strong of a signal, though. These correlation coefficients are not high. You then say, well, what about that negative Pacific meridional mode, that cold water off the west coast? Well, the cold water off the west coast looks like this. Now, you need to flip your thinking. These warm colors mean wetter. No. Forgive me here. They mean drier. And the blue colors mean wetter. And you say, well, why? Because the Pacific meridional mode is negative right now, which means we have a negative correlation would be wetter with precipitation. So that runs the risk of being drier a big section of the country right here. And I really don't know which of these is going to grab hold of the pattern. I just don't. And so I look out there and say, well, what are the models saying? I think the models are stuck on persistence. I think that they have got an issue with that ridge that's here now, opening up here. And as a result, there's going to be some heat in this area. There's going to be some heat that gets even farther north of that. And what they're doing with that heat is giving us the risk of being a bit drier overall in the pattern. But I believe that the European model is hung up on the evolution of the next 2 weeks, and they're just keeping that all the way through the month of August. Because to see the temperature pattern, which looks something like this for August, just open up for blanket wide heat, that doesn't make sense with any of the teleconnections we have, even though we aren't even seeing strong relationship with India, but it still doesn't fit. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Okay, let's boil this all down into something, and then we'll look at some wild cards. I'll leave this on the temperature map, but you remember that this area was drier in the forecast. Drier, not dry, but drier. We've seen a ridge in Texas that built in heat in late June, getting into early July. That ridge opened up to the west and brought in all this substantial heat here. We expect that ridge to open into the central United States. But during this time, we've seen repeated troughs of colder air showing up in this area, and the models keep missing the depths of those troughs in the week 2 time frame. So could that mean that this ridge makes this kind of complete loop and comes back over to the west? That is a strong possibility. And if it does that, and it just keeps coming back in this direction, and we get some reinforcements from a trough here, this whole area opens back up for the cascading of storms like we've seen as of late. And the west takes on the heat. The monsoon is suppressed. We build in more heat into California, to the Pacific Northwest, out of Texas. The south stays hot. So that would be a likely scenario if I take a hold of what I think could happen because of what's happened as of late. So let's keep all of that in mind. There's a wild card in everything, though. And the biggest wild card are these ocean temperatures. We have got right now across a broad section of the Gulf of Mexico, ocean temperatures that are between 86 and 93 degrees Fahrenheit. This is what you're seeing here is in Celsius. And we know that we have ocean temperatures across the rest of the Atlantic, which are already hotter than the peak of hurricane season, and wind shear has been low. Now, if you got hot ocean temperatures and low wind shear, and if something comes through and can spark off a hurricane, I mean, it'll go in a big way. And yesterday, just after I finished recording my morning report, the National Hurricane Center did provide an update where they bumped this up to a 20% chance of some cyclone development. In fact, they should have done, they got an 8 a.m. update and they've kept it at 20%. So Don's up here spinning around, but this is the area that we're going to watch. There's an African easterly wave that's got out here and it's starting to just show up as potentially developing. So right now, if you look at the European ensemble, it's bringing that out and it's doing something here, pushing this across the Lesser Antilles into the Caribbean. Now, what we need to watch for is if at the end of this, it does get over into this area and any bit of that instability, any bit of that thunderstorm activity gets into the Gulf, well, this could just really take a quick turn north and dump a tremendous amount of precipitation and start to bring just moisture back into this area. So we are watching the tropics as a major wild card right now. But there is a few issues, right? One is the dust. Over the next 10 days, there's a pretty sizable plume of Saharan dust that's moving across the Atlantic. It'll be here at the end of July over parts of Texas to the lower Mississippi River Valley and into the southeast. That'll be, of course, after it goes through the Caribbean. And so sometimes these storms have a difficult time kind of chewing on that dust and some of the problems that it can create. But I want you to watch it pretty carefully. What we do know is this. Over the last 3 days, we have seen very large complexes of storms in the midsection of the country here, including major flooding just kind of south of I-70 here, getting into this part of Missouri, all the way down here into, where the Ohio and Mississippi come together. Some places picking up, just terrible flooding. This is there's flood disaster declarations in places in through here, and we're still trying to clean up after this. Been wetter throughout parts of the Ohio Valley here as well, and throughout parts of New England. A lot of isolated storms in the west. Feels monsoonally, but it's not. Monsoonally is a word, but it feels like a monsoon, but not quite fully the monsoon we expect. In terms of hail, last 3 days, just looking at maximum accumulated hail size, I was here yesterday, and there was several pictures floating around about the hail that was in Pierre, South Dakota. They got ripped apart there. But there was one picture of a young girl holding a large, very, very round hailstone. And I called it into question with the group I was speaking with yesterday. But I'm thinking more about this, and I'm waiting for the National Weather Service to kind of confirm what was going on there with that hailstone. But I do want to tell you something. Let's do this real quick, Twitter. This is my Twitter account. Let's go to my profile. I got to show you something I saw yesterday. I have been wanting to meet this guy for a long time. His name is Les Scott. He lives in Vivian. He's the guy that found the world record hailstone. And I got a bit of a story from this guy. He said that this hailstone, which you see in the picture, was 10 days after it fell. He found it after the Vivian storm in June 2010. Put a massive, it destroyed a lot of stuff in this small town of Vivian. But he said at one point before this kind of broke off that he estimated that hailstone was 11 inches in diameter. Well, I met him. And he gave me a t-shirt, and this dude is fantastic. But I love the front of it. It says, getting stoned in Vivian. So there we go. So I now have a t-shirt. I'm super excited about that. And it's just ironic that I got it the day after a big hail event hit the same particular region. So where's the pattern going? In the near term here, this is the near term pattern. Severe weather threat's going to be here later today. See, the Gulf has opened up into there. There's a little short wave coming over the top. We have our deeper low that's brought in the cooler weather here. We're going to watch to the south of it for stronger storms. So if we look here at today's severe weather risk, Colorado, Kansas, the panhandles, watch carefully. Where the front dives through over here in parts of the east, we're going to keep a very close eye on the storm. So watch the radar all day today. Now we know that the high-res NAM, which is one of our better models to try to see this, never gets the timing right. So I just want to tell you that later today as this front comes through, let me rephrase that. Watch this area carefully for the risk of storms. And then this evening, coming out of Colorado, there's going to be some hail risk out of this. And we need to watch very carefully tonight, getting into the overnight, for that cluster of storms to come out of Colorado and go through Kansas. Now, after this goes through and the low has kind of made its way out, there's going to be storms that continue into this area, and we can see them maybe a bit better by looking just at the next 7 days. So this will be a stormy corridor in the near term, and then after that, this region goes a bit drier. And the region that we're worried about is going to be north of that, who's missed out on some of the recent precipitation. There's been decent moisture in there in pockets, but that's the area that the ridge is going to start to open up. So the newest 10-day outlook on precipitation anomalies has drier risks in places in through here, and this extends into the Canadian Prairie. Here's what we're calling into question. Will there be cascading storms over the top of this? The thing that could help that would be if the jet stream hangs out right there on the border between us and Canada. So here's Saturday, see the trough still in place, watch. Into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, it opens, there's the ridge bringing in the heat. Look at the speed of the jet stream right in through here. And then watch, this is next Wednesday, Thursday. So this is when we expect the heat to come in. Now, did you notice what I just showed you there? Just keep an eye right here where I drew this black line. We'll go back and forth. Can you see the way the atmosphere is flowing around this ridge? I cannot rule out into midweek next week storms running over the top of this, storms running through the Canadian Prairie. And then as we get out there toward the end, this is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, look what showed back up. There's that trough again. So the ridge tries to go back toward the Four Corners states. And that is where I'm curious if it's going to stay getting into the month of August. So what do we get out of this? Our precipitation chances of grabbing more than an inch over the next 10 days. You've already seen this. We've described a few things. Watch for this area to begin to see increased values. We'll talk about it again tomorrow. We'll watch it over the weekend. Then when we look out there and say, is there moisture coming? Well, remember, the heat comes on midweek next week. That's also when we start to see the atmosphere opening up to more moisture transport in this area, which means if you get a day where you hit your convective temperature and the atmosphere just pops, there'll be plenty of moisture to work with to make these storms go in this area that's showing up dry in the forecast models. So what about the week 2 forecast? CPC increased the precipitation here. So did the European, and it's actually in the GFS now. Where is it drier? South, as that ridge really starts to show up here again. It's drier in the west as well. So just watch this evolve in a way where the models didn't see the thunderstorms properly, okay? Last couple things, temperatures. Here's the big story, put it all the way at the end. This is Thursday getting into Friday, so the heat is still in places it's been, all right? We then go into the weekend, major cool down Friday, Saturday coming into Oklahoma. They've been way into the triple digits, finally got some cooler weather. But you know it's going to be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday that the heat gets out of the west, ridge opens. There's a lot of temperatures here next Tuesday, well into the 90s, hundreds, Kansas City, hundreds south of there. And then here it is on Wednesday. We're going to crack 100 degrees Fahrenheit in a lot of places here next Wednesday. But we want to know how long it's going to last. So that's why we see the heat opening. And then we start to see the ridge flexing back west, the trough coming back into this area, and maybe our heat wave is a week long rather than a month long. So that's what we're going to discuss. We're going to keep watching this pattern, and thanks for giving me some extra time here on Thursday morning to kind of walk you through it. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Thanks.